Would you eat 100-day-old beef? How about a steak aged with mold? No? You have to try it. Here are all the most delicious ways chefs take your steak from pasture to plate. When aging a cut of meat, chefs and butchers leave the meat in a controlled environment to undergo changes that enhance its flavor and texture. However, the fact that many diners find this particularly desirable is a modern concept. Before refrigeration, livestock owners who lived in cooler climates butchered animals in the fall and left the carcasses hanging somewhere to be chilled by wintry weather. Sometimes they cured the meat, such as by making sausage. At other times, they simply saved the meat in a cool, dry environment until it was needed. Once butchers could count on refrigeration, though, the meat industry blossomed. Now, slaughter could happen at any time of the year, and meat packers could send massive amounts of product to grocery stores after hanging it for just 30 to 48 hours. Their profit then and today depends on making this aging process as short as possible. The 2-day hanging time remains a practice for modern producers because muscle tenses up the first day after slaughter, making the meat too hard to consume. Then, an enzyme called actomyosin starts to break down the muscle fibers in a cut, and the meat becomes far more tender. That tenderness will increase the longer the product is left to sit on a rack, hang on a hook, or remain in a vacuum pack. According to regulations set by the USDA, meat sold as aged must have been allowed to relax for a minimum of 14 days.
Steak night! Give me some of that.
In dry aging, large cuts of meat hang from hooks or sit on special racks in a designated refrigerator or cold storage area. To get things just right, culinary experts obsessively control the airflow, humidity, and temperature, which should always be above freezing. Too low and the enzymic changes stop. Too high and you won't reduce the growth of harmful bacteria. Large, fatty cuts of prime beef are best for aging. Chef Dean Harper, the founder of Harper Fine Dining, says that with a large enough cut, time taken can allow the formation of a protective crust, also called the bark, that protects the meat itself from spoilage and is removed later. Larger pieces of meat mean less gets wasted during trimming. Executive chef Michael LeDuc of the Capital Grill line of steakhouses describes his aging process in detail. The key to the dry age room is keeping it at 34 to 38 degrees and approximately 75% humidity. He says that he gets the best results when he ages beef between 18 and 28 days. Chef Joe Paish of Rollo's in New York employs a slightly lower temperature of 34 degrees and humidity set at 55% for the first 3 days, followed by 80%. He also highlights one of the main benefits of aging, saying, "The water loss allows for a more beautiful sear and more even cookery." One of the most interesting ways to add a new dimension of flavor to steak is by dry aging it in liquor. Here, temperature and humidity are still carefully controlled, but chefs take a couple of additional steps to infuse the meat with the taste of whiskey, rum, wine, or another alcoholic beverage. Chef Michael Saperstein, owner of Sunshine Provisions, elaborates on his process. The loin is wrapped in cheesecloth and sprayed with the liquor of choice. At Sunshine, we spray the loin 1 time per week. Popular liquors are whiskey, dark rum, or other dark liquors with aromatic properties. It works because meat takes on the characteristics of what surrounds it, which can be a blessing or curse. Just as a hanging steak will happily absorb the smoky bite of a Kentucky rye, it can also absorb the flavors of other pungent items nearby like mold. So restaurants and supplies take steps to keep their meat lockers immaculate. Chef Saperstein uses mold to add a distinctive taste to aged beef, lightly covering cuts with white mold, a form of penicillin that is used for dry curing, or Aspergillus oryzae, also known as koji mold, and dried for 21 to 45 days. Penicillin gives sausage its white outer layer, while koji grows on rice and soybeans to ferment those into sake and soy sauce respectively. Chef Guy Meikle demonstrates the process of using koji on the YouTube channel The Chef's Roll. Meikle cuts a crisscross through the outer fat on a ribeye, then smears the cut with koji paste. A couple of days later, he does the same on the bottom. Besides improving flavor, Meikle claims this speeds up the aging process so that instead of storing meat for 45 days, his restaurant can move the same high-quality product after just 15 to 20.
The shio koji is great for dry aging because it speeds up the aging process while giving a huge umami boost and tenderizing the meat.
Some even claim koji can age a steak to restaurant perfection in just 48 hours. To try it at home, grind up koji rice, rub it over a steak, and leave it in the fridge for a couple of days. Afterwards, scrape the layer of koji off with a knife before pan-searing the meat. Some butchers allow cuts of meat to age for much longer, to the tune of months or even years. Though eating meat that's been stored for that long may not sound appetizing to newcomers. Meat expert Dana Ehrlich of Verde Farms and board member of the North American Meat Institute says, "I've seen as long as 75 days in Australia. Mold also grows on the outside and needs to be cut off, so the flavor ends up becoming very concentrated and very expensive." For most diners, having to cut a mold layer off meat may not sound appetizing, but some are fans. As Chef Paish recalls, "I recently sampled a 110-day dry-aged grass-fed beef shank and found it to be incredibly delicious." French cattleman Alexander Polmar is widely recognized as the champion of long steak aging. He has some steaks in storage that he's been waiting to eat or sell at high prices for over a decade. A single kilogram of his meat can fetch more than $3,200. Polmar's secret is a two-step process. First, he dry ages beef. After around 50 days, he places it in a specially designed freezer where extra cold air blows constantly. That means that ice crystals form differently than they do in a regular freezer. The point of all that is to further break down muscle tissue, making it even more tender. We guess you would call that ice aging.
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age!
Wet aging is the most common method of imparting a more tender texture to your meat. It means putting steaks in vacuum packs and then in a refrigerator. Ehrlich says this aging process usually takes between 14 and 21 days, and adds, "It typically won't have as dramatic an effect on the flavor as dry aging, though there is still a significant tenderization process involved. Believe it or not, you eat it all the time. What you think of as the taste of meat is in fact the taste of wet-aged beef." Most meat you buy in the grocery store has been wet-aged for some amount of time, although not always a full 2 weeks. Aging meat this way has some huge benefits. Reduced food waste is a major one. Cutting the bark off of dry-aged meat when it's ready to consume means throwing out quite a bit. Wet-aged meat doesn't need any additional trimming. The cold storage where meat is kept in vacuum packs isn't just to allow the aging process either. The plastic pack will keep most pathogens and funky flavors from getting to the meat. In other words, wet-aging meat is a practical way to get beef to your table at the cheapest possible price. Coating a cut of meat in a layer of semi-solid fat such as tallow, which usually refers to beef fat, or butter before starting the aging process can bring some incredible benefits to the final product. That's because one of the biggest problems with dry aging is the loss of so much moisture and weight from a given cut of meat over the lengthy aging process. Adding a layer of fat around a cut before leaving it to age not only helps retain water but also adds flavor. Chef Saperstein explains his tallow aging method. The loin is dipped in liquid tallow until thoroughly coated. This produces a very beefy, concentrated flavor profile. Other animal fats can produce slightly different flavors. For example, Chef William Iyek of Matsu says that duck fat creates delicious results with distinct flavors.
Duck fat makes all the difference.
Chef Nick DiGiovanni walks viewers through his process of butter aging on YouTube. He takes a smaller cut of meat than what's traditionally used in dry aging, just 10 pounds of Wagyu. He whips up homemade butter and covers the cut with a 3/4-inch layer, wearing gloves to prevent the butter or meat from becoming contaminated. Then he leaves it to age for 60 days. When cut open, there is only a thin bark on the exterior of the meat.
When I eventually flip it over, this whole top here is a funky color, and we're gonna wanna carve some of this off.
Some chefs prefer using a combination of dry and wet aging, and the result can be fantastic. Chef Dean Harper explains that when the two methods are used together, the dry hang usually lasts between a week and 2. The period over which the meat ages in a vacuum pack can vary depending on the taste and texture a chef is after. Executive butcher Tom Milan wrote in The Atlantic that the best steak he ever tried was one aged this way. The animal had been 100% grass-fed. After slaughter, the carcass hung for 2 weeks. Then, the meat was aged for a second 2-week period in a vacuum pack. Apart from creating mouth-watering steaks, one of the biggest advantages of using this combination of aging styles is a reduction of moisture loss. While meat dry ages, a lot of water evaporates from it. This is one of the reasons it tastes so much meatier. So why can't we have that all the time? Well, chefs and butchers sell beef by the pound, and letting it dry for too long means it weighs significantly less. Putting meat in a vacuum at a certain point stops this loss of moisture, but the period spent dry aging adds flavor. Each method of aging meat will appeal to different people. This is a matter of personal taste, so there is no correct answer. Many consumers prefer the flavor of wet-aged beef because it tastes familiar. Dry-aged cuts have a far more intense beefy flavor and often have notes of blue cheese due to the mold that sometimes grows on the bark. From a practical point of view, wet aging is superior to dry in that it allows for more flexibility. Restaurants don't need exclusive cold storage only for aging steaks, and neither do determined home cooks. Dry aging, on the other hand, is more of an art. If you're feeling truly curious about which is better, you probably have some delicious dinners to look forward to.